Welcome, everyone. I hope you read the patch notes recently because you may have seen that Deny has been nerfed and is finally, as many people have been asking for many months, even since the beta, is finally 4 mana. And what that means for most people is you can play your favorite spells, your favorite, activated or gold little coin abilities that you've always wanted without any fear of Deny for the most part. It's just a lot less popular. And more than anything, people are excited to play the War Mother's Call. And here we are, the LoR Brothers Call. A call between two brothers playing Legends of Runeterra all the time. That's my open. What's your name? Introduce yourself, brother of mine.
My name is Boulevard. This is my brother Ryan Effin Miles using his real name because he's not afraid of doxers like I am. Please don't send a SWAT team to my house.
There we go. All right, so we are going to be talking about the patch. Not so much the patch notes themselves, but just kind of what the ladder has evolved into since the notes have actually happened. But just to kind of recap what exactly changed in the patch, we are just going to go through each change individually, which shouldn't take like more than 10 seconds a card, because most of them were irrelevant, but we did see a lot of excellent nerfs to Demacia, Ionia, and Shadow Wilds, which we thought were, the most egregious. So first up on the list, Lux got some stat buffs, no longer dies to Culling Strike on the front. Hasn't really seen a big increase from you. You've been seeing too much Lux?
None.
Yasuo is a little bit easier to proc. I still think the only way to play him is in Noxus. I don't think you can play Ionia with any other class or faction or region, whatever they're actually called. I don't even know. I just don't think he's doing too much more than he already was. And there is like a Noxus Katarina deck usually you see him in, but mostly just still kind of dead, yeah?
Yeah, Yasuo decks have always been super reliant on seeing the Yasuo. This change doesn't impact the deck in any way as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Back-to-back costs 6 now. Thoughts on that one?
Like the change, still seeing it. It's not coming down as early, which is cool. It's a little bit harder to keep up, but it's still as impactful in the late game as it always has been. So, it's fine.
Yeah, I like this a lot because it's a change where I think the card is seeing like the exact same amount of playability in the decks that play it. Like I think the Elusives like made that deck not the Elusive nerfs to Lifeblade specifically made like the Demacia Elusive deck less popular, but like the decks that play back to back would just play the same number of back to back as I used to. So like this is a nerf that was like completely like kind of perfect, I feel.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny because Demacia's popularity has gone down a bit, and because the Elusive deck is less popular, Purify's playability has gone down, so you're not seeing as much Purify, which actually makes back-to-back better.
Pretty much, yeah. Next up, Arena Battlecaster. Never saw this card before, have not seen it since.
I've seen a big uptick in Noxus aggro lately, have not seen any Arena Battlecasters.
Yeah, I imagine there's probably some Arena Battlecaster could fit into a deck that's like a bit more token focused, like it's playing the Spider 2-drop that's in Noxus that has some generic spider name like Haunting Spider or something, and then playing like Crowd Favorite, but like there's just better things you could be doing for 2 when you've got like 5/1s and stuff,
I'm actually kind of fine even with these small. There are a couple cards that like got tweaked, and it's like, all right, this card doesn't matter. It didn't matter before. It doesn't matter now. And I feel like those are more kind of like expedition changes.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Crimson Curator I actually like a lot. I think with 3 health and just like the nature of his ability, I think like I've been messing with Vlad a little bit, where I like to play Vlad Freljord because I like Freljord Noxus for some like sadistic reason. This feels really good. Like before it was like maybe a 1 of in the deck, but now it actually feels like it has a bit more of a purpose. You get a bit more card draw, it does a bit more things, but overall just like in terms of like actual meta game and like tier 1, even tier 2 stuff, I don't think it did anything right.
Yeah, I mean, you get to double the amount of copies that you make with it now, which is really cool because it has to survive the damage, right?
It does have to survive the damage.
Yeah, so you've doubled the amount of copies you can make off of it, but overall, just essentially cycling through 3/3s isn't really that good. Like, it's not something that I think
it doesn't make copies. It makes a random Crimson unit.
Oh, I thought it made a copy of itself in your hand.
No, there's also other Crimson cards. There's like Crimson Curator, other Crimson. I don't even know.
This Crimson Curator's not even a Crimson card. Unless they just didn't put its thing at the top. Oh, you mean like in the name, not like an actual, like it's not like an Elnick or Tech or whatever. It's not like a creature type.
I think it's just in the name, because I've always, like in my head, I played it as like it just makes it a random Noxus card, and I think every Crimson is a Noxus card. Now that I'm like reading this card live on the podcast, I'm realizing that I might actually have no idea what this card really does.
Okay.
But really, like a 3-mana 3/3 is like not too much right home about.
Not great.
It's only taking non-lethal damage when you like activate it yourself with like a Transfusion or a Vlad or like a Death
I haven't
Lotus.
seen any since the patch drop. I've heard a lot about Vlad decks, but as far as I know, they're still not playing this.
Yeah, no, it's just not high value enough. Next up, Deny 3 to 4. Feel pretty good about this one. I think we're still seeing Deny. It's less ubiquitous in tempo focused decks, and it's more assurance for the long grindy decks. So you're not able to just play on like curve every single turn and then still hold open to deny to protect your board. You more have to like play one back and then see what your opponent does to kind of react to what you're doing. And then if you want to keep up deny, then you're just actually playing one behind every turn. I think it's super impactful to prevent it from being an oppressive like tempo tool, but it's like still super insanely good in like the karma decks that we've seen pop up.
So as is the nature of digital card games, the meta is constantly evolving, and I think Deny is going to be a big card that we see change in playability on a day-to-day basis. The first day that the patch had come out, I was seeing a lot of control decks, but I had also seen a lot of people go down to 2 Deny in response to that. I could see people going up to 3 Deny because there's a lot more like Shadow Isle Freljord, Shadow Isle Ionia. There's a couple War Mothers decks popping up, and I think people want to counter that. But then the caveat to that is those decks start to pop up a lot more on ladder. We move more towards stuff like Noxus aggro. Deny goes back to down to like a 1 or 2 of. And I think it's just a card that we're going to see fluctuate a lot on ladder. Definitely not as much of an aggro tool as it was. So now we just kind of get to like flop back and forth between control decks and things that beat control decks.
Yeah, I know day one on the ladder, there was someone streaming just a War Mother's Call deck, and he just went all the way to rank 1 playing that because everyone was like, finally, Elusives are dead, Denies at 4, Lifeblade has only 2 health, we can just play, big greedy control decks, and then he just steamrolled the ladder. But then people were like, wow, these War Mother's Call decks are popping up everywhere. How do I beat that? Oh, I guess I just like, there's 2 ways to do it, right? You can either go fast, low to the ground, Piltover Noxus aggro, Shadow Isle Noxus aggro, just get a bunch of damage in before they really get destabilized and before like stuff like Ruination comes online. Or there was a Karma control deck which just still plays, or even Heimerdinger control, which just like plays deny, doesn't let them resolve their big spells, and then also just generates too much value for them to beat. And like those 3 archetypes, the War Mother's Call hard control, the Ionia also hard control, which is like more vulnerable to aggro because it doesn't have like the avalanche and the box to beat the big swarm decks. Like those 3 have been kind of in flux with some other stuff just like popping in there, like Elnook stuff and whatnot. But so yeah, the Deny to 4 feels really good right now. I think this is probably going to be an impactful card for the rest of the game, and I think 4 is where it needs to be.
Oh, for sure.
Inspiring Mentor
went from a 1/1 to a 1/2. The buff in hand went from +1/+1 to just +1 on the attack side. This card's pretty much been taken out of the meta as far as I can tell. The buff on the defense was a huge part of the defensive capabilities of making a sticky board that can't be blocked. And now, without the buff on the defense for the units that you actually care about, I've seen this card pretty much fall off the face of the planet.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be you would Inspiring Mentor your Lifeblade a couple times, and it would be like a 6/7 or like even a 4/5 pretty easily. Now you can make your Lifeblade a 4/2, and just like the nerf on the Lifeblade plus the Inspiring Mentor just makes it so like the Elusive just doesn't feel as nearly as difficult to remove. And again, a lot of the control decks are just very easily clearing boards, and then like you can't play on curve and hold deny as easily. So that was a huge push to make that less good.
Yeah, putting Navori Conspirator and Shadow Assassin out of Avalanche and Mystic Shot range was huge, and not doing that anymore it kills it.
I mean, almost every other deck is either Shadow Isles Freljord or Piltover now, where it used to be Shadow Isles Ionia or Demacia, right? So
yeah.
Next up, Jeweled Protector is now a 4/4. I like the card a lot. I think it has some uses, but because of the Elusive just kind of seeing less play, I haven't seen this card.
This is, to me, is like the definition of an expedition change.
Yeah. Kinku Lifeblade, health 3/2. Beautiful, right? This is what you love to see. I really did have a lot of problem with Lifeblade just being the linchpin. I think we talked about last episode, or I might have just done it to somebody else in person. Just like Lifeblade stopped you from being able to race Elusives, and they were so good at just killing you, and then if you were trying to race them because they were understated, you just couldn't. Even a 2/3 was understated, but it wasn't understated enough. So this change on top of Inspiring Mentor just almost gutted the deck, I would say.
Yeah, like if you have 1 HP, you die to everything. If you have 2 HP, you like only get to dodge Vile Feast. If you have 3 HP, you actually get to dodge a decent amount of removal. But going from 3 to 2, you suddenly open yourselves up to things like Avalanche and Mystic Shot, and it's just even to like double
super
Vile
important
Feast.
cards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ledros to 9. Now, you had talked a lot about Ledros on the last episode. Specifically,
Yes.
You wanted to see the card go to 10, and you didn't really mention any power changes to it. They changed the text on it, but really the card functions the same. It's still lethals at 1 HP. It still rounds up the damage, not your health total. But it only went to 9, not 10. So how do you feel about that overall?
Honestly, I've been seeing mostly control decks that are any combination of Freljord, Shadow Island, Ionia. Pick any of those two factions, stick them in a control deck, and you'll see it. And I've seen decks that are even still playing like two Ladros. And honestly, like because the meta has slowed down so much, making it 9 instead of 8 still feels, it comes down at, it's a turn later. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference in these decks because the game has become a lot less tempo based over the last couple of days. At least in my initial responses to the patch, like I feel like cards like Will of Ionia just suck now because there's no concept of tempo anymore. It's just like who can do the most late game thing as much as possible. And the fact that he still gets to bank spell mana and you still get to play Ladros and have deny mana, I think it's still broken.
Yeah, but crucially, it's a playability. So this card isn't really gonna see much play in the War Mother's Call deck. So do you feel
No.
like Ladros like versus War Mother's Call? Like, do you think that like Ladros is good if your opponent isn't playing Deny, or if your opponent is playing Deny? Because like yeah, you can deny Ladros's ability, but you still have a 9/6. It still comes back to your hand when it dies. So it's some that late game pressure that's like almost unbeatable in the sense that it's going to keep coming down, keep attacking you for 9, and keep cutting your life in half. With War Mother's Call, if you have Deny, like you just shut that down completely. You just have to beat like 3 Trindamirs and a couple of Niveas, and then you're good to go. So do you think like Ladros is better than War Mother's Call, or just different, or like do you have a sense of which one you like more in the current meta?
I actually think Ladros in a War Mother's Call deck is absolutely insane because I get to bring him down. Let's say I even hit him off the War Mother's Call,
Yeah.
because I probably get to play multiple Ladros in a deck like this because I don't care if he comes out of the top of my deck. I get a 9/6 Fearsome. I get to attack with it. If you block it with a big guy, or like I just get to keep the pressure up, then it dies. It goes to my hand. I get to play its ability, and I'm perfectly content to spend my entire turn playing Ladros turn after turn because I already have a War Mother's Call going that's building up my board for me. Suddenly, I just get to play one minion every turn and feel good about it because I'm just building up, spell mana, building up cards in hand by just playing the same guy over and over again, still cutting your life in half, still building a bigger and bigger board. I think Ladros has actually benefited a lot from the meta change.
So I can kind of follow you on that. I guess my concern overall is like with Ladros in a War Mother's Call deck, like yes, you still get him back to your hand, but like the deck is already so packed full of expensive things between Anivia, Tryndamere. Like by the time you're finally playing the War Mother's Call and you reasonably expect it to resolve, if your opponent's not a deny deck, then your life total is probably pretty low. When you rip a Soul Gorger, right, the 6-drop 3/7 with lifesteal, you're stabilizing in some capacity. When you rip an Anivia, you're guaranteed to have a blocker when you attack because it'll revive itself. When you play a Tryndamere, even if Tryndamere dies, it will revive itself and you'll still have a blocker. But with Ladros, because it goes back to your hand, it's probably like one of the worst defensive pickups from the War Mother's Call. Like, does that factor into it at all, or do you think like there's just so many control decks battling each other that it really doesn't matter? Like, if you're playing a War Mother's Call deck, you're just trying to avalanche or box on 4 and then see where it goes from there.
More or less, I think that a lot of the deny decks are running a lot of healing anyway, so it almost feels like you need something like Ladros to keep them in check. Where it's like if they're healing for like there's a lot of life still being played right now, and the fact that Soul Gorger is so good, even if Soul Gorger's been buffed twice by like Avaros and Hearthguards or something, Ladros is still going to one-shot him. The 9 attack stat line is actually pretty big for him right now because Soul Gorger has such a large defense, and he even gets to trade with the Tryndamere. You take 2 damage, you like replay him, trade with the Tryndamere again, you take 3 damage, you've taken 5 damage off that, but Ladros has come down and cut your life in half, so it kind of balances out. And the fact, like, he's basically a recurring Tryndamere, except you have to spend the mana on him every turn. But because my deck is full of big guys and I'm pulling them in off of the War Mother's Call, I feel completely fine to just still play this card out every turn. If I draw a better, like Tryndamere or Anivia, and it's better for the situation, I can play it. I don't feel bad taking a turn off of Ladrosing you, but the fact that he's just so big and gets to block and trade it out with the big guys, I think still is just really, really good for him.
And then even then, he's like also super good with Tryndamere, right? So like you're in a War Mother's Call mirror, like suddenly like, oh, I have War Mother's Call and got Tryndamere. Oh, I have War Mother's Call and got Tryndamere. Oh, I got Ladros, and they're like, oh, and things get pretty dicey pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah, especially if I get to play the Ladros on your turn and have a Tryndamere on board, and then it's like I have another Tryndamere in hand, and it's like, all right, well, you're at 10 life, I attack with my Tryndamere, battle rage it, and suddenly I've got 17 trample coming in at your 10 life. Like, you're pretty much always going to die to that unless you have your own evolved Tryndamere or a Soul Gorger.
Right. No, that makes sense. All right, next up, we've kind of segueing into our next topic already, but let's kind of finish this up. Rasa 7 to 8. I love it. Your thoughts?
It's fine. I wanted them to nerf I didn't think Rasa was going to get nerfed because I thought Hecarim was going to get nerfed, and I thought nerfing Hecarim, Rasa, and Ladros was going to be too much, but instead they just skipped the Hecarim nerf and went straight for Rasa, which is a path that I saw them taking, but was kind of hoping that they wouldn't.
No, I would have liked to see Hecarim too. I'm personally very happy about the Rasa nerf. I just hated the card at 7. I think on 8, it's like you have a lot more time to kind of pull together a board and then also get up some setup onto like some weaker dudes that will not die to, or that like will eat the bigger dudes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like they will eat the Rasa as opposed to the bigger guys. Big fan of this change, but most Shadow Isles decks are not really playing that many Rasa because they're gravitating towards the Freljord Warmother's Call. But
yeah, and a lot of them are going like 2 or 3 Vengeance in the main at this point. So
yeah, Vengeance is just super good for that kind of stuff. Scuttlegeist got fearsome. Okay.
That feels like another
Expedition change. Tortured Prodigy is now a 4/4.
Super expedition change.
Yep. Wraithcaller, no more fearsome.
This is probably my favorite change that they did because this is exactly what I wanted them to do. Now playing cards like if you're playing like a Freljord control deck, you finally have something to block with your Avarosan Sentries or your what's the 0/3 that ramps the stone.
Wording
Stone. Yeah, Wording Stone. So like once those are no longer useful for the ramping aspect, you can just throw them away under a Wraithcaller, and it just feels good to have at least one thing that I can chump block in this deck.
Yeah.
Overall, I would have liked to see this combined with another early game nerf to the Fearsome deck. I do think Fearsome decks are probably still very strong, and I think the reason that so many people are getting away with these greedy late game decks isn't because the Fearsome deck is bad. It's because it's the first few days of ladder. Nobody wants to play Fearsomes anymore. The deck was nerfed. You feel like, oh, finally, I don't have to play this to ladder anymore, and people are just trying out new things. But I think in a week or so, we're going to see the Fearsome decks come back.
So I still think that the Fearsome decks are very good. I think this nerf was like just like a slight hit. I think the Rasa nerf was also like a slight hit. And the Deny nerf was also kind of impactful, I would say. What really impresses me like about the Wraithcallers is I think that the Elusives kind of disappeared. So now like Wraithcaller decks just go wide. That's what they do. The Elusive decks would get tall, and that was like a big problem for any deck that wanted to be control, was they couldn't deal with like Elusives and then also deal with the Wraithcaller decks very effectively. So now all of the aggro decks are pretty much, or like the more aggressive decks are like Noxus, spam the board, empty my hand, like Piltover, goon you, and then Wraithcaller decks are still also like Fearsome Spider, Wraithcaller, Mist Wraith, like 2 to 3 health boards. Cards like Avalanche in the box are just very, very good against all aggressive decks. So you have a more streamlined way to make it to the late game as a control deck, and I think that has actually also helped to make it control better. Even though I don't think Wraithcallers really got that much worse as a deck, the lack of Elusives being a diverse aggro threat has really made the control kind of a lot more linear and therefore more playable. That's kind of been my take on it.
I think that's why we've seen the shift in the Noxus decks as well, because they have started to run more burn spells in the main. I've seen Decimate in the main of every Noxus deck I've played against so far, and I think it's just kind of an adaptation of your strategy of I want to go really wide in the first few turns, then I do want to have these burn spells to finish you off, because once you box me once, then I'm very low on cards because of the nature of the deck that I am, and then I need to not play so many creatures that I'm losing. Like they're going down on buff spells because they're trying to rely less on their creatures because the control deck's going to be more streamlined in how they deal with these decks. I definitely think they're going more towards a burn strategy rather than the go wide thing that they were just kind of doing the same thing as the Fearsome deck previously. Right. And now they're like, okay, well, if we do the same thing as the Fearsome deck, we're going to lose to the same thing as the Fearsome deck. We have to adapt. We have to put more burn in and a little less Brothers Call and Overwhelm and things like that.
Brothers Bond.
Brothers Bond, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like,
yeah. I knew it had brothers in the name.
That's what we should have named this podcast. What were we thinking? All right, so
you came up with the name.
You didn't say no. Anyway, so moving on, we've been playing on the ladder since Tuesday. Got a pretty good feel of what the new meta is. We talked decently about the big late game control decks, but like overall, we talked about even how Demacia fell off. But like, what are the biggest losers of the patch overall in terms of like deck, popularity, strength, like that kind of stuff?
I definitely think Demacia is the biggest loser, which is funny because it's the only class that got a buff champion. But Demacia really only saw play in the Spiders deck and the Elusive deck from at least the Mobilytics tier list that we had talked about last week. And I've probably seen more Dawn Spiders now than I was at the end of the last patch, just because, there's still more or less a Fearsome deck that just run back to back and Dawn Speaker and things like that. And Dawn Speaker helps the aggro decks go tall again in a little bit because Dawn Speaker itself doesn't die to Avalanche or the box, so it is a little more resilient than that. So those decks get to go a little bit taller. Back-to-back nerf didn't really hurt the deck too much. But I think overall, I've seen a lot less Demacia than anything else. Ionia, I thought was going to be a big loser, but Karma decks have just skyrocketed in playability.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that the Elusive archetype overall, like Conspirator, Inspiring Mentor, Kinku Lifeblade, Shadow Assassin, like that whole thing is just a ghost town. Like I don't see that pretty much at all anymore.
So actually, something I wanted to bring up about that is there was a Reddit thread about somebody who post-patch played the Elusive deck from rank 200 something to rank 5 and made a big post about it. Because basically, so I don't know if that necessarily speaks to the strength of elusives or if it speaks more to the fact that like this deck is not something I should be preparing for in the meta anymore. So like I don't play cards for decks that go tall like the elusive decks used to. So if you have one person and it's a very unpopular deck, then they can pilot that deck to success if they're
Right.
good with it. They know what they're doing, and it's like nobody's prepared for this anymore because you shouldn't be. And if you start to see it in like wide capacities, all I have to do is change out like 2 or 3 cards in my deck, and I can fight it a bit more effectively. So I feel like he just kind of snuck under the radar with that one, and not necessarily like the elusive deck is still like one of the best aggro decks out there.
Yeah, did you happen to see his list at all? Because I can imagine some worlds where I think like hand buffing your elusives is still pretty good. Like it's just it feels slower than like the aggro deck, so it could definitely get under the control decks and kind of get them down. But when it has to fight other aggro decks is where I feel it struggles. However, with like the Jewel Protector being a 4/4 now, it's like not irrelevant when you're like fighting against a Draven that's got like 3 attack and you want to attack with your Jewel Protector and stuff like that. And then if you play Jewel Protector and you buff your Kenku Lifeblade, now he's a 5/5. Well, it's like, well, that's a little bit easier to deal with than a 5/6, but it's still like it's just getting him a big enough buff. Yeah, not by a lot, right? So like that kind of stuff really does kind of compound. So I'm interested to see if he played that kind of stuff, if he played standalone, like those kind of cards. I could see them succeeding very well in this kind of environment for sure.
Yeah, something that I wanted to also note is that while Ionia did get a big buff in playability in general because of the Karma decks, the aggressive options for Ionia took a bigger hit than just Deny going to 4 mana. Because we're no longer in a like super tempo-based meta, I feel like Will of Ionia has fallen off super hard. It was a card that was very good against Elusives because it just pretty much negated a back-to-back or a standalone or any hand buffs you would put on something. And I feel like now we're not in a meta where like that really matters as much if you're playing against like Ezreal Elnux was a big deck at the end of the format. Like Will of Ionia was terrible against that deck. It's okay against Heimerdinger because you can put some of the turrets back in their hand for full cost or like time walk them if they go for a Heimerdinger. But overall, Will of Ionia has fallen off pretty hard. And I think that that's another thing that has like let the elusive decks kind of go through is the Ionia decks that are being played aren't playing Will of Ionia anymore.
Right. I still like the card a lot. I think it's because you have Deny. Like you said, like tempo kind of doesn't matter as much anymore. When decks just want to go to like turn 9, they're even ramping and they're playing War Mother's Call. Like even if you have Deny for the War Mother's Call, you still have to beat a Tryndamere. And like Will of Ionia doesn't really answer the problem. It like helps them you deal with it for a turn, but they have no problem paying 8 mana again if your Will of Ionia is in a control deck because like
Will of Ionia in the aggro decks was definitely a lot better. Like Hecarim would get played on 6, you would Will of Ionia it, and then you would push another like 5 or 6 damage through elusives, and then they'd play it again, you'd do it again, like push another 5 or 6 damage, and that was like a very tempo oriented play. Nowadays, with the way that decks are going and how late game everything's going, Will of Ionia just feels a lot worse.
Yeah, no, definitely. Biggest losers for me, like everything you said, definitely 100% correct. I feel like the Mossy has fallen off a lot. Accidentally, I think the Freljord Noxus deck, the Ashe mid-range, has kind of seen a lot less success. I tried it a little bit and just felt absolutely terrible because it was not bad at dealing with like the diverse threats of what Mistwraith could do and also what Elusives could do, but it just gets like, and it can fight control, but it really just can't beat War Mother's Call, and it does like not really turn on the aggression until like turn 5. It also like has a hard time with Ruination because it wants to just like play 5 attack minion, 5 attack minion, 5 attack minion, Assessor, draw 4 cards, and it has to get even greedier against control decks to build a strong like multiple 5 power unit board to get as much value off Assessor as possible because you are just playing a lot of Frostbite cards, and it does play Elixir of Iron to like beat Avalanche, but it's just so a little bit too slow because all these control decks are like ready to fight Piltover Noxus. So like yes, Freljord Ashe like Noxus can also be aggressive, but it's just not nearly as good at doing that as the aggro decks, and I think it kind of just doesn't have a super good either Ionia Shadow Isles, Freljord Shadow Isles. Like the matchup just doesn't feel great. The freeze almost feels too clunky at that point.
Yeah, I actually tried that deck last night because I was like, this deck probably is like super dead now, right? It was a very tempo-oriented matchup. I kind of have this theory that like tempo is not as important anymore. And I just opened double Avarice and Hearthguard and eventually got off like 2 Trifarian Assessors to draw like 7 cards total. And I was like, okay, I actually just roll you over now. But I think that actually, I think the deck, as it currently was, it was a very counter meta kind of deck. And I think the deck just needs to adapt to beat the new meta where freeze effects are a little less important. But I do still think that something like an Ashe a mid-rangey kind of deck can exist in the meta.
Hmm.
I just think it has to adjust to what things were
I almost
or
feel
what things
like,
are now.
yeah, I almost feel like the correct play. I think Assessor is like the defining card in Freljord Noxus. Like Ashe was just kind of like the answer to the meta. But when you're just going like Avaros and Hearthguard, buff my whole deck, play another one. Babbling Beard draws my Hearthguards on curve. I play Assessor. My 3 attack 2-drops are now have 5 attack, and my Assessor draws me 4 cards. I think that engine by itself can be very, very successful in almost every metagame. I think that Ashe is probably just not really the play anymore. It's a 3 health 4-drop, so it's dying to the box. It's getting pinged off with like Avalanche plus a Marksman or a Vile Feast. And then it's like frosting your biggest guy, which doesn't matter when your opponent doesn't even play guys until turn 8. And then,
Yeah, I think it was a very combat value oriented deck, which isn't going to work anymore because Vengeance, Grasp of the Undying, all this instant speed removal has really picked up popularity in the Shadow Isle deck. So even if you are going for like, oh, you're staring down a giant Soul Gorger and it's like, oh, I want to attack my wolf into that and frostbite it, then like I have to play a card to frostbite it so the wolf will actually kill it, and then my wolf just dies to Grasp of the Undying, and all of a sudden like I got 2 for 1 and it feels terrible.
Yeah,
I think they just need to have the new game plan. But Grasp of the Undying is definitely a card that has picked up a lot of play and just destroys that deck.
Yep, and that's kind of why even Ezreal has fallen off. But before we move on to other Piltover and other like nerfs and stuff, I think there are other options for Freljord Noxus. I think like Vlad, like we have seen, picked up a decent amount of steam, and he's a 5 attack 5-drop. He fits the Assessor game plan. He likes it when Avaros and Hearthguard buffs your entire deck so that things can survive more damage, so Vlad can get more things going. So I think there is maybe something there, and the deck could evolve to that way. And like you were saying earlier, or we talked about before the podcast, you had seen a lot of your friends talking about who are kind of not really in like the higher elo, but like the Vlad, Elnuk deck is picking up steam. So you want to talk about that a little bit? Like, is that something that's better or just like new, or like what's going on with that?
So I think what happened was what I had mentioned before was Will of Ionia seeing a lot less play. And I think Vlad was a big victim of Will of Ionia being in the meta because he is a 5-mana creature that doesn't get any immediate value. And he doesn't get as much on attack value as Hecarim did. So like Hecarim, I'll play in a Will of Ionia meta because if I ever do get the attack off, then I'm in a great spot. And it's possible for me to like, I can play him at the end of your turn, then like play him again on my turn. Like you need 2 of Will of Ionias to deal with that. And like if you do that to my Hecarim, sure, I already had this big wide aggressive board. In Vlad decks, because of the factions that he's in, can't really build that wide aggressive board that the fearsome decks could. So if you Will of Ionia my Vlad, then I'm actually getting set back a lot more because I need him to get his attack off to get value and actually like have my creatures do what they're supposed to be doing, because my entire deck is built around these things surviving damage. So the Will of Ionia always felt a lot more backbreaking on the Vlad because of the kind of deck that it was in. And now that Will of Ionia has more or less fallen out of the meta, I could definitely see Vlad kind of sneaking his way back in.
No, that sounds like a pretty reasonable thing. Vlad's been like my favorite champion in the game since the very first beta, and I don't think he's any good, and I would love to see them make him a little bit better, and they just haven't. But this is not a bad time for him. It definitely feels a little bit better than what Ashe has been doing. But moving on, biggest winners of the patch. What decks have just came out of nowhere or were already good and now are way better? Is it because of the cards that got buffed or nerfed specifically, or just like the way the meta shifted? What do you think has really come out on top of this?
I think obviously Shadow Isle is still a really strong faction. It's just now we're seeing a lot more of the other side of it, like your really late game cards. We're seeing a lot more Grasp of the Undyings, Withering Wails, Vengeances, things that we're seeing a lot more spell decks because they function with Karma very well. We're seeing a lot more Soul Gorger because it just deals with the early aggressive card decks as they stand, and is also just like a very good hit off of War Mother's Call and things like that. We've even seen some Harrowing decks start to pop up, which I think is really interesting. And it's actually a really funny answer to like the Shadow Isle Freljord decks where it's like, okay, well, I Harrowing, all of a sudden your Tryndamirs and Anivias are now on my side of the board. They all have Ephemeral, but they all die and then come back as the revived versions. And it feels really, really good. So I think Shadow Isle made out really big. Ionia made out really big because the Karma decks have just started to pop up everywhere. Obviously, Freljord is the biggest winner in my opinion because it was seeing so little playability before and has now skyrocketed because of War Mother's Call. And just the general package of the Ionia or the Freljord decks. I really think that Hearthguard is one of the best cards in the game. It was one of my favorite cards in the beta, so I'm really glad to see that kind of stuff picking up. And it's also just like one of the most frustrating cards to play against. The Omen Hawk, I think it's Omen Hawk, only buffs the top 2 cards of your deck by 1 for 1 mana. So you add 4 mana, you make a reasonably statted 5/5 minion for 5 mana, and like it's already a threat in itself. And then the fact that it buffs my entire deck, even if I'm not playing a War Mother's Call deck, there's a lot of minions like Soul Gorger that are like, okay, well, 6 mana, 3/7 with lifesteal, that's okay. But a couple Hearthguards later, and I have this 5/9 lifesteal. That thing's almost impossible to kill without Vengeance. And because you're seeing more damage-based removal and Grasp of the Undying and Box and Avalanche, something like that gets to stick really hard against control decks, and you can't really afford to Vengeance it because of all of the other threats that I have.
Yeah, and crucially, like even when you see like the mirror match, like resolving one Hearthguard means that your Soul Golger now is able to trade with the first half of Tryndamere, and then like once you trade with the first half of Tryndamere, you can Vengeance the second half, and like the only other ways you could do that was like a Nivea, like an evolved Nivea attack or something like that. So being able to get proactive with like your trades and stuff is just super important in that kind of mirror match, but also just like against any of the aggro decks, Soul Gorger, the more attack that has, just the more value you get, and like I think the deck plays like 6 cards that cost less than 4. It's usually very, very top heavy, so you definitely need that stabilization tool, and just stuff like that is super, super good for sure. My biggest winner, I would probably have to say, is just actually I don't even know. I think it's Warmother's Call. It's probably like it's gotta be like the card was completely unplayable before, and now it's like you can actually see it being played. Oh no, I lied. All right, it's Teemo. It's got to be Teemo. I think that the decline of elusives overall has allowed Teemo to see play, and there's less Black Spears even because the control decks that are Shadow Isles aren't really playing like the Black Spear because they don't have the units to kill to be able to activate it. So it's really just Vile Feast you have to fade, and then Avalanche on 4. So it's like your Teemo might get 1 or 2 attacks off, and then like it still comes back later on. I've seen a lot of aggressive Piltover Noxus decks that aren't Jinx Draven. They're like Draven Teemo. Or there's like Shadow Isles Teemo stuff. There's like a lot more Teemo than I'd ever seen before, and I don't really respect it too heavily, but I think in terms of like where he was to where he is now, I think Teemo has actually been the biggest winner of the patch.
That's probably true. Like, I want to say that like Freljord went from like completely off the map to like one of the best decks in the format, but the Ezreal Freljord deck did exist, and it was one of the things that was like picking up a lot of steam towards the end of the format. So like Freljord was actually like very playable and almost certainly tier 1 despite the Mobalytics tier list going into the new format. So like it's not a big of a jump as I kind of made it out to be because the Ezreal deck did exist and was considered to be like the best deck. And then like Teemo was kind of coming up. I know Mogwai had talked about this where like he thought that the Teemo deck was like a big counter to the Ezreal deck. So I don't think a whole lot of people were on that though. I haven't personally seen too much Teemo, and with the absurd amount of healing that I've seen out of all the control decks, I'm hard pressed to actually see Teemo doing super well in the meta because he does kind of have to slow burn you. There's no way you're actually going to get a whole lot of Teemo attacks off in the late game against a control deck because they just have so much removal. A lot of the stuff is going to end up being doubled by Karma if we're on like turn 10.
Right.
Even
so like what I've seen from the Teemo decks is not so much that they're using the Teemo and actually ever evolving the Teemo. They're not even like playing like Puffcat Peddlers. Like they're just playing like Teemo. They're playing maybe Clump of Wumps, usually Chump Wump, when Chump Wump is just like put like just a 4/4 that also gets you some extra value and gives you like things to discard for Draven. But like Teemo Draven is just like, I Teemo on 1, I hit you, you just took 6 damage on turn 1, and like yes, the extra 5 damage will take time to like get there because this aggro deck, like the longer it goes, the worse it gets and the more healing you have. But if you're just top decking like 1 damage over the course of like the next like 7 turns, like you will take 3 to 4 damage. So that Teemo effectively did hit you for like 4 to 5 damage on turn 1. Like you just, because these decks want to go long, you just play Teemo with like a normal Piltover Noxus aggro package, and it's just like even like Teemo Jinx is like a thing. Like it's not terrible. I'm personally not a huge fan. It's just like the way that I build like control decks, I respect it, yes, but like I never respected Teemo before. You literally never beat a deck that played Shadow Assassin, but like that kind of stuff has fallen off. So I think it's the biggest winner in my mind. And I'm not saying it's like good now, but I have seen it. It has hit very high masters, and it's just like, I mean, people aren't playing elusives to block it, so you have to have the hard removal.
I think Ezreal might actually be like one of the biggest losers of the format.
Really?
Which is really unfortunate because that's the deck I chose to ladder with on patch day. It's just so hard for it to beat the control decks with how much lifesteal they have. Like Ezreal generally, like they put in the Elnuk package so they can hit you down to like 12 in the early game, and then there wasn't a whole lot of healing in the format. And it's like, okay, well now I just have to do this extra, like I just have to evolve my Ezreal, deal 6 damage to you. Now I've had a lot of games where I'll get to like turn 6 or 7 and my Ezreal hasn't targeted anything because they just haven't played anything. Also, and I don't have the aggressive early game to really push through the damage. Like I played Chump Wump, and honestly, I'm going to say this now, I think Chump Wump might be the best 4 mana minion in the game, but he's not enough. You know, the amount of healing that comes out of them between Soul Gorger and the Ionia Shadow Isle decks have been running Darkwater Scourge and Deathmark, or
Oh yeah,
I
no,
think it's called Deathmark.
yeah, Deathmark is correct.
Yeah, so they've been playing that stuff, and it's like I never get to do this stuff to you. Like you just have so much lifesteal.
I've been playing before I really got onto like the War Mother's Call being like the absolute best way to like disrespect deny. I was just playing a no champion Freljord Shadow Isle deck that really focused more on like the reanimator stuff. So the early game was actually like Ravenous Butcher, Curse Keeper, like 3 Chronicler, Scribe of Sorrows, just like actually getting like a pretty wide board with Death Rattle. Like I played double Undying, which isn't really something you see in a War Mother's Call deck, but it's super good with like Avalanche Box Ruination. So that's what I was laddering with on patch day, and I played against Team Liquid's Hyped. He was playing the Elnuk Ezreal deck, and like that, like I was being aggressive. I was like doing aggressive things, and just like trying to chip him down. And then it got to the point where he evolved his Ezreal. He got to play double Progress Day because like even though I do have aggressive tools, I'm still like a double Ruination, Ledros, Rasa deck. But he like plays Ezreal number 1, and I'm like, all right, Vengeance, take some damage. All right, cool. Grass of the Undying Jump Moment, I'm back to 20. He's like, play second Ezreal. I'm like, cool. You attack me, I Black Spirit, and then he's like, oh, okay. And then like he tried to like do stuff after that, and it's like, okay, well I can just Vile Feast so that I can grasp it again. Like I had so many ways to kill Ezreal in response to him playing spells. Like he just needs burst speed spells, and you just don't have enough burst speed spells to actually do like enough damage to beat the amount of healing and hard removal that the control decks really have. And that was something that was just like
you're almost certainly always going to have to get down to at least playing like a couple of fast spells, and like a lot of the Karma decks I was just losing to because like I would play my fast spell and then they'd have an evolved Karma and just play Health Potion on their face.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well that's 3 spells worth of damage that you just got back. I can't deal with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I definitely agree with Ezreal, because like the aggressive decks too are almost too fast for Ezreal. So like you do have the tools, the Mystic Shots, the stuff to like kind of deal with them, but they're also just like they're playing double Decimate. Like you don't play heal, like you're just gonna die to that. There's not much you can do about it.
The Freljord decks in general have always had a pretty big lack of healing, and that's kind of solved by pairing it with either Ionia or Shadow Isle for your control deck, because both of those factions do have a lot of healing. So if you pair Freljord with anything other than Ionia or Shadow Isle, you have no healing, and it feels really bad. And Boom Crew Rookie is a big problem for the Ezreal deck.
That card is so good. It's a 3/4 for 2. It's like terrible on the board, but like it's just got 4 health. It'll be fine. Like block me. What are you gonna do? You need like a 4-drop to block that thing and kill it in one go. It's kind of insane. I would love to see that card be like a 1/3. Honestly, like I'm not like at that point yet where I want to see it nerfed, but like I can see the writing on the wall, like where my blood is just like being
six months from now they're gonna be like, we're going live. Oh, by the way, we're nerfing Boom Crew.
Yeah. No, definitely that card is just kind of nuts for sure. I don't know if I talked about this in the last episode, but if I haven't, and if I have, I want to make it a thing where I talk about it every single episode. Why does no Noxus card have lifesteal? They have vampires. And there's no Noxus card with lifesteal. I don't understand. This is the biggest flavor fail in the history of flavor fails. I don't know what's going on. I'm very upset about this. Now that I've gotten that out of the way.
So I could be misremembering, but I've been watching a lot of like Raynad's updates on the Bazaar and stuff, and he was like, "Oh, well, we wanted to make like this vampire class, and then like we were doing all this lifesteal stuff, and then we just realized that that's really boring and hard to balance." Where it's like you see a vampire and you're like, "Okay, it's going to do the lifesteal stuff," and like it's actually pretty hard to balance stuff like that from a gameplay standpoint. Apparently, is what Raynad was saying, and it's also just like boring. It's expected. It's like I want like. Vampires don't actually do that. I want to see vampires that are just like turn into like 6 wolves and just maul you to death. So like that's what Dracula did. Right. Or I get really gay in my castle with this guy and I give him a shave. Like that's what Dracula did. He didn't like suck the life out of people to keep himself young. He just was like really weird and reclusive.
Well, I think a couple of the Crimson card have succeeded on that aspect of being very weird and reclusive, as in they never pop up in any decks. But God, I just want one. Is it so much to ask to have one vampire that heals my face? Is that?
Yes, because then every vampire has to do it.
Not every vampire. Not every vampire. Just one. Just one. Why does Vlad deal damage? Why does Vlad eat his own guys to deal damage to your face? Why can't? Because
that's what vampires are supposed to do. I like that they've taken a different direction with vampires instead of just I drain your face. Like that's what like Grasp of the Undying and like the Shadow Isles.
Okay, I understand this, but like we have lifesteal in our game, right? So now you're telling me that the lifesteal mechanic in the game is not on the vampire, it's on
It's on the Soul Farriers. I don't even know what to call Soul Gorger. Like
what do you call Kenku Lifeblade? He's just a dude with a sword that also just like phase shifts through the shadows, and then it's just like, yeah, stab you. I also gain life from that. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's why Akali had healing on her Q. The Kenku just gonna do that.
That makes sense. He took balance patch notes from regular League Legends. All right.
Yeah.
So that makes okay. Yeah. So anything else that's kind of popped up on the ladder that we could talk about that's just like new and like wasn't expected, or maybe it was or something we did expect that just like didn't happen on the ladder? Like, what kind of stuff have you seen from that?
I thought Heimerdinger was gonna fall off a bit more. I haven't really played Heimerdinger since the patch, just because like I played it so much pre-patch. I played it through Diamond. I played it a lot in Masters. So I just kind of like wanted to step back from the Heimerdinger deck, but I definitely thought that the Deny to 4 was going to hurt it a lot, especially with the amount of hard removal that we have and the, a lot of upticks in Grasp of the Undying and things like that. I really thought Heimer was going to struggle a bit more, but I did run into it a few more times, got reminded that like, this deck isn't great if you don't see the Heimer. It feels a little more inconsistent than the control decks that we're going for, but it definitely has the tools to aggro them out. But so I'm not actually sure where I would put Heimer in the meta right now. I don't think it's as high as I actually put it pre-patch.
I think that one of the biggest problems with the Heimerdinger is it does really explosive things on like the turns 6 to 9, but it actually does kind of fall off late game in my opinion. And because all those turrets, like because you're not doing anything for turns 1 to 4 for the most part, right? And then you hit turn 5, and sometimes you have to wait till turn 6 to play Heimer just so you can hold up on the Deny as well. And you don't want to just like play him and get him Vengeance and be like, oh, guess I'll die. All of his turrets have 1 HP. And that means that Avalanche kills all of them. It means that Withering Wail kills all of them at fast speed. So it's actually really hard to build up that big board of elusives and just dome someone for like 12 in one turn that it used to be. And even if you do manage to dome someone for 12, they're just back to 15 in like 2 turns. And you don't really have the spell mana. And if you are doing Heimer where you're going like triple progress day or something like that, then you're just kind of able to fall prey to the Teemo decks, the Noxus decks, the more hard aggressive. There's like the super fast aggro and the super late control, and like Heimer's kind of in the middle of them, where it's gonna have to see multiple Mystic shots, multiple Get Exciteds to ever beat the aggro. And then if your opponent ever plays Boom Crew Rookie and you're playing Ionia Heimerdinger, you can just pick up your cards and go home because you're probably not beating. It's just too hard to actually kill that card if it comes down on 2.
All right, I think I can break this down. So Heimer, there's a lot less elusive in the format, so you would almost think that like Heimer could actually just like build up a really big elusive board and deal with that. The problem is that there's more Vengeance and more Grasp of the Undying instead of Rasa, so it's actually a lot easier to kill Heimer on the turn that he comes down. You no longer have Deny to protect Heimer on the turn that he comes down. It's pretty easy to float Vengeance mana into the Heimer turn, so Twin Disciplines isn't going to get the job done. He, like you said, all of his turrets only have 1 health, so they die to pretty much everything. You only have 3 Heimerdingers. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see Heimerdingers tech in like the card that shuffles more Heimers into your deck, just so that they have more threats to actually play with. But I think like they're also
more Heimers, which is like I guess more progress days when you think about it. But yeah,
you're also like more like, so the way that Heimer would deal with wide boards and like big wide boards, which is what the War Mother Call decks are putting out, is I would just build a bunch of turrets, trade with them, refuel with like progress down my turn, play a bunch more cards, just like damage trade into you until you're out of resources.
Right.
And the Karma decks, the War Mother's Call decks, they're not really running
resources.
Yeah. And another big thing is like I would steal a lot of games by getting to an Enlightened Karma turn and then just blowing you out with Mystic shots and Get Excited. And there's too much healing in the current decks for me to do that. Like I can't hit you for 9 with 3 elusive turrets the turn my Heimer comes out, put you at 11, then wait till turn 10 and play double Get Excited. That doesn't work anymore. There's too much healing. Soul Gorger is impossible for me to deal with because the only removal I actually have is like Will of Ionia. So like I can't, stun those every time. I can't stun your Tryndamirs every time. Like eventually I'm just gonna run out of cards that actually deal with your guys, and you only need to hit me 2 or 3 times before I'm just dead.
So is there any like variant of a Heimer that's going to function outside of maybe Ionia? I mean,
oh, for sure. Sure. I'm sure Heimer is definitely a deck where it feels like it's kind of like what I think the Ash deck is, where it's like it's something that you build into a specific meta, and Karma Ionia before, or Heimer Karma before, was just like an answer to the meta. It had the tools to deal with the aggro decks and still, outrace them and things like that. So now Heimer just needs to find a way to exist in a control meta. I definitely think that the card pool is there. I don't think I'm going to be the one to figure it out. But I do think like Heimer can adapt to just about any meta and be fine.
Check it out. Ready? So you're looking for a 3-mana card that lets you play Heimer on 3 and then allows it to survive Vengeance, right? Like that's
Mhm.
a winning successful play, I would say. Mist's Call, Shadow Isles Heimerdinger. Think about it. Talk to me. What do you like? Is
I
that
think
viable? So one problem I do have with Shadow Isles Heimerdinger overall is actually just there's not many good 3-mana spells in Shadow Isles. There's Mist's Call, which is like obviously good if they try to kill your Heimerdinger. There's like make a
Let
ephemeral
me
1/1
stop
copy.
you right there. So my problem with Shadow Isle Heimerdinger has always been that the Shadow Isle spells are very reactive, and
Mhm.
with Heimer, you definitely want to be a lot more proactive
Okay.
and be able to win the game. Like Will of Ione is a defensive card, but I don't feel terrible about just on my turn naked jamming a Will of Ione on your big guy so that I get a 4/1 turret.
Right.
And the Shadow Isle things always feel really reactive. The other problem is that Vengeance is a very good Shadow Isle spell, and it's a very, very bad Heimerdinger turret. The 7/1 barrier is probably the worst turret for
Well,
its actual like
if we're
cost. That
losing all of our turrets to Avalanche and Withering Wail, Barrier doesn't sound terrible anymore.
the problem is like I generally want to like vengeance things on your turn when you attack me, and then like I play my turret, it loses its barrier going into my turn, and like I feel like I can't even attack with it.
Right. And some
It's
of the
really awkward to actually get the barrier turret down at a opportune time.
So just progress stay the vengeance, and then it costs 6, and you get an overwhelm turret. Like, isn't that what good players would do? Are you just not on that level yet? I don't know what to tell you. I mean, yeah, no, I think that they like. While I like a lot of what Shadow Isles actually does for Heimerdinger, the biggest drawback for me is just how awkwardly costed the spells are, and how bad the Heimer turrets are with what the Shadow Isle spells are doing. I think Mist
Yeah, like
Call is
Grasp
like
of
super
the
interesting.
Undying is like awkward.
What
Harrowing.
does the 5-mana tower even do? I have no idea. Like,
It's quick attack.
okay, I guess. Yeah, I mean, like,
I think I've gotten it off like once.
yeah, I mean, it's like I did know that, but like, is it relevant? Like, I guess it
I
killed
don't think
Avarosa
so.
and Hearthguard.
The fact that they all died of Vile Feast and like Vile Feast is now being played as a hard 3 of in just about every
Well,
deck.
a
It's
lot of
like,
the Shadow Isle deck, actually, the War Mother's Call specifically, don't play Vile Feast at all. Like, they just like, okay, you can play your stuff. I'm just gonna Avalanche it. I don't
I
need
see
the
it a
Vile
lot more
Feast.
in the Shadow Isle Ionia decks because with
Yeah,
Karma out, it's deal 2
it's
damage, gain 2
super
life,
good,
which is
right?
like
Right.
not terrible. Like Karma just makes all these bad early game spells scale into the late game.
Mm-hmm. I've
Like there's no Black Spear to worry about, but like there's Grasp of the Undying, which is
yeah.
easier to just naked jam.
I haven't
So.
seen too many Ionia Shadow Isles. I think I've seen like a little bit, but like I don't think too many of the spells scale. I think every spell with Karma scales when other people are playing Deny, because now it's like I'm gonna vengeance your guy. And they're like, cool, I'll deny it. Now it's like, no, I'm going to vengeance your guy, and they're like,
Well, I mean, so
oh
like
yeah,
she turns Withering Wail into a 5-mana deal 2 gain 6.
yeah.
She turns Grasp of the Undying into a deal 6 gain 6. All of a sudden, Grasp of the Undying is basically functioning as another vengeance.
Yeah, no, pretty much, I would say. Yeah, I just some of the like you were saying like some of the early game stuff. Like I was messing around with Karma in like again I just really like the Reanimator package because it can just kind of turn aggressive, and I thought like
Yeah.
Karma with Rekindler. Now my Karma never dies. I always get to late game. This is great. But I was also playing Chronicler of Ruin. I was also playing the
Yeah.
Curse Keeper. It's just stuff I could play. Like I like Glimpse Beyond. I like drawing cards in my Shadow Isles decks personally.
I mean,
think
Chronicler of Ruin doesn't sound terrible. Or yeah,
Chronicler.
No, I'm thinking of Rekindler. Rekindler and
yeah.
Heimerdinger. There we go, baby. I got 6-mana Heimerdingers.
Hold up.
Um,
You play Heimer
you know,
on
you
5,
play
you're like, cool, Vengeance. You're like, cool, Heimer on 6. They're like,
So I'm thinking like,
Whoa.
so check it, right? You play Heimerdinger, you play like 1 or 2 of the Harrowing, and that gives you an 8/8 turret as well as a giant board of everything that is out of this game, which might include another like T-Hex and like whatever big guys you played, and then I just like bop you.
All right.
I think
so,
the big problem with this though is that like Ruination just bodies you, so you can't play your own Ruinations, and it's just like
yeah, you can't play like. Oh well, okay.
very
so
unsynergistic.
here's the thing, right? Like, no. I think Ruination is like actually kind of not good right now because it's too slow for the aggro decks and it doesn't do anything against the. Like, I guess it's okay against War Mother's Call some of the time. And
Well,
like,
War Mother's Call will play it because like I'll Ruination for a +1 because I'm gonna get more
yeah.
dudes off the top of my deck with this War Mother's Call.
I'm just saying, like, I'm not sure how I feel if like Ruination's actually good right now. Like, I love the card sometimes.
I've been seeing it a lot.
Yeah,
I don't know.
see it a lot, but is it
Great,
good? I don't. I play around it all the time.
I've been playing
but is it-
Elnix, so it
is
bodies
good?
me.
Oh yeah, no. Elnux is like cool on 5. Elnux, and they're like cool on 6. Ruination. You're like cool.
That's basically been my ladder
Yeah,
experience.
no. I mean, that's like, what do you do? Like, yeah, you have to when you're building a deck to compete on this ladder. There's like very specific things that you have to be able to do. You either have to kill somebody before they play War Mother's Call, you have to not auto lose to Deny, and you have to not auto lose to like Ruination and Avalanche and the box. I've even seen a lot of the Freljord Shadow Isles decks like not even playing the box, and I'm like, that seems crazy to me. But
I've seen a lot of them that are playing like 3 of the box.
yeah, like I haven't seen those, and I'm like, why is no one boxing me? I when like beta 1, beta 2, week 1, week 2, I thought the box was like almost a contender for the worst card in the game, because I like got an expedition a couple times, and I was like, this is just like 4 mana deal 3. Like, this is just not good. It's like very situational 4 mana deal 3. But the more the meta has evolved, the more we see Wraith Callers, the more like just the fact that Karma has 3 HP, the fact that Heimerdinger has 3 HP, the fact that Ezreal before he evolves has 3 HP, like a lot of Draven has 3 HP, Jinx has 3 HP. Like, the box is just like 3 damage, like without having the conditional effect of Black Spear, and having it be at fast speed is actually way more relevant than I ever gave it credit, up until like I started seeing it in like Zeta-Lot's list, and I was like, okay, the box is a legit card.
I think one of the things with the box is like you assume that it's going to be in every Shadow Isle deck, so like you have to play around it. Like, you can't just play a Karma before turn 10. Like, you have to wait until she's actually evolved. Otherwise, like, you die to grass, you die to the box, you just die to too much. Like, it's so unsafe to play your Karma into that. So I think like even if I'm not playing the box, you still have to play around it and respect it in these control mirrors. And also, like, it is just good against the Noxus decks. It kills everything except Boom Crew Rookie.
Boom Crew Rookie. Like, I remember like
and it doesn't kill Trifarian Assessor either. Or no, the 5/4 that can't block.
Reckless Trifarian.
Reckless Trifarian
Does not kill
there
him.
We go.
Yeah. No, 4 HP does remain as kind of like the gold standard of unremovable.
Yeah.
3 HP
I
is
definitely
like
think
sticky, but 4 is like, oof.
3 HP was playable because Black Spear and Get Excited were like really the only things we saw. But now with Grasp and the box being so much more popular, I think 3 HP, like, you really need to be a good unit to try and be played with 3 HP.
Yeah. Do you feel like, so obviously Freljord has been like increasing popularity, but mostly in control decks. If you are playing like Elnuks and stuff, or just like a general mid-range deck that happens to have Freljord, like, do you think Elixir of Iron is like any good, or do you think there's just like too many also hard removal spells where it's not really keeping anything meaningful alive, and it's not even like worth being a card?
I think it's good if you are trying to keep things with either 2 or 3 health alive. I think that like the 5/1 that can't block with Challenger and Noxus, like, I think that card has just become completely unplayable, because even with Elixir of Iron, like, I can't save you from the box or Grasp with the Undying. And I think you need to at least be able to like stave off Grasp with the Undying. Ideally, I'd like you to have 3 health before I play it, so that I can't get like Grasp Vile Feasted.
On the flip side, though, like, some of the War Mother's decks aren't playing Vile Feast, but it's like only Vile Feast that kind of kills it on 2. So like, yeah, you draw it late game, it'll go ahead and die to Avalanche, it'll die to the box. But if you play that guy on 2, like, there's not an unreasonable chance that you're just hitting your opponent for 5. Is that like not worth it? I mean, it targeted attacks into Karmas later on, like.
I don't think so.
No, that's
not
fair.
with the amount of healing that we see in the meta. Like, early damage, like, just doesn't feel great. I've been playing, like, I would play the Ezreal deck, and I'd like play my Troop of Elnuks, and I'd high roll it a little bit, and I'd push like 12 damage on my opponent. They play 1 Soul Gorger, and suddenly my entire strategy is out the window, because they like, you know, they play Soul Gorger, they block a Bull Elnuk, at the same time they grasp a Troop of Elnuks, and all of a sudden they have like this 6 life swing. I only got like another 3 damage through. Yeah. The Soul Gorger survives. They like slam down another one. A lot of them are also playing, like, the Ionia decks are playing the 2 mana 2/2 lifesteal that becomes a 6/6 when you're enlightened.
Yeah, that card's
and like
yeah.
That on top of Soul Gorger, on top of Dark Water Scourge, it's just, there's way too much healing coming out for you to try and play a mid-range deck that's pushing early aggression and then trying to like combo you out in the late game like the Ezreal deck was. So that's kind of how I feel about that right now.
So control is mostly king. Have you played any aggro yourself, or have you played against enough aggro to really kind of talk about it?
I haven't played aggro myself. I've played against a couple of the Noxus decks. They always bodied me because they played Burn and I was playing Ezreal, and I'm like, all right, they're out of creatures, I'm good. They top deck Decimate, I just die. I think I'm going to take Fearsome onto the ladder tomorrow, just so that, one, I can get an idea of where that deck stands, and also I kind of want to know like how aggro actually does fare into this like control heavy meta, because I don't think there was enough aggro nerfs to warrant this large shift in the meta. Because I don't like Wraithcaller losing Fearsome and, you know, Rasa going up 1 mana has absolutely no impact on the way that the control decks currently play the game. Like, they're not playing anything that could have blocked the Wraithcaller before. That, like, the fearsome removal matters, and like they're not getting Rossed anyway. So I think that like it's a little bit too big of a jump in the meta where I feel like there is some cracks in what we're seeing early on. And I think we're going to stabilize into a meta with a lot of aggro in it to compete with these late game control decks. But at the moment, I think that it's more so just people being like, okay, I don't have to play aggro anymore to ladder. We've all just kind of handshaked that we want to try a different meta out, and we're all just playing control decks because we can. And I think by the end of the weekend, we're going to see a pretty good split on aggro versus control.
Gotcha. No, I agree. I have one last question for you, since you did say Demacia was your biggest loser, and I kind of want to close this out with a new, fresh, spicy take. Opinions on Lucian. How do you feel like he's doing right now?
I think that Lucian is really, really, really good. And part of that is that Senna is just one of the most insane creatures out there. A 4/2 quick attack for 3 mana is really good.
So we've talked a lot about how just like 2 health
the
is
2
not
health
where
threshold is like
right?
not where you want to be, but with the decrease in Ezreal and Heimerdinger decks, there's not as much Mystic Shot, so like it's really just Avalanche.
There's a lot of
tilt
Piltover though,
boxed.
right?
I haven't really seen a lot of Piltover. It's really just like I've seen like a couple of Karma Heimer decks, but I just think like if I can get a Lucian down and then I can get a Senna down, like because Lucian's probably coming down before you actually have mana to do anything, so like it'd have to be Avalanche like a turn after Lucian comes down, in which case I have the mana to protect him with something. So if I can like stick a Lucian, float some spell mana to protect him, and then play a Senna, like you don't want to kill the Senna all of a sudden.
Yeah.
You want to kill the Lucian, but now I have mana to protect him. So it really kind of depends on like what faction you pair with him, because Demacia doesn't have a lot of inherent protection itself for the Lucian. So maybe you go for like I've seen a lot of like Lucian Zed, because then I get Twin Disciplines to protect him, I get Deny to protect him, and things like that. So
you're also just playing like 2 of the best 3-drops in the entire game.
Yeah, exactly.
Zed and Senna,
like,
right?
It's really easy for me to just like splash Lucian and Senna into like a Dawn Speaker deck that's just like a Spiders deck, and it's just like I play Dawn Speakers back to back Lucian Senna, and like I don't even necessarily have to play Wraithcaller in those decks. I can play enough Demacia cards that I don't care about whiffing on Allegiance, and I just think like they're really good standalone support cards. Like any deck can be improved by or any aggro deck could just be improved by throwing in like Lucian, Senna, and like one other card. I don't necessarily know how often that's going to be stronger than like an entirely different faction. For example, like you see the Piltover Noxus decks, I don't think they're going to switch to like Demacia. Like I haven't seen any Demacia Noxus aggro.
Yeah, no,
I don't think we're going to see something
tried
like
it
that.
out and I felt kind of medium. It's just like you just run out of cards very quickly and everything dies to like so many things that it's kind of hard. And
Lucian inherently wants to be a board centric kind of controlled or aggro deck. I just like maybe elusive decks will start to like as we see elusive aggro kind of claw its way back into the meta because people realize like it's still a good mechanic. I think we're going to see Lucian pop up a bit more, but I think that he's got a place for sure, and I think it's going to like actually end up being one of the really good things. It's definitely an archetype I'm extremely unfamiliar with, though, so I could just be completely wrong here because he's like one of the few champions left that I just don't own, and I generally don't play aggro, so I haven't crafted him, so I'm very unexperienced with the deck. But I do really like the idea of cheap first strikers.
Yeah,
and I think that he's good. He's good.
I kind of messed up a little bit. I'm very fascinated by his concept because I think like when you get to see both Lucian and Senna, it's like you just get to do a lot. It's like a very powerful card combination. And when I think about like, man, if someone goes like Wraithcaller and then goes or Miss Wraith and then goes Wraithcaller, that's insane. And I'm like, what if I just go Lucian and Senna? Like that seems insane too. Hold on a second. But I actually tried it, and this wasn't like. I haven't put a lot of thought into this. Maybe we'll be able to talk about it a little bit more next week. But I tried like Lucian Senna in a Heimer deck, and like Demacia has like extra stuff to keep Heimer alive, which is cool. And now where the Ionia deck would do like Shadow Assassin and Solitary Monk on like 3, now you're doing like the Lucian Senna, and people have to be like, oh, I have to like use my 3 damage removal spells as like a priority on the Lucian and the Senna, or like the Lucian as soon as I see it, because if a Senna comes down, suddenly I'm taking too much damage. So like it almost baits out the removal spells early for the Heimer to make way. And it's just like a couple units, right? Like you're not really going very unit wide for the Lucian. But then if you get the Heimer online, you're gonna create a bunch of units for the Lucian to like maybe evolve off of 4 guys. And that's kind of like a take I've been taking. So like while like Lucian does want to be more board centric, this is something I'm experimenting with. So stay tuned for next week to see if this exactly got anything going for it. But it hasn't been bad. Like I didn't even like have the gall to take it into Masters. I was just playing it in normals, and I was like, let me just like see what my hands look like and see exactly where this is going.
I definitely do that as well. Like every time I build a new deck, I'm not tanking my rating with this. First, I just want to see what a hand looks like, so I know if this is even a deck that I could potentially play the game with.
Yeah, no, like it doesn't. It's got stuff. I mean, it's got stuff. I don't even know what else to like say about it. So
Lucian Senna is definitely a card combination that I have my eye on because it just is such a small package that you can fit into so many decks. Just like you don't have to be a board centric deck with Lucian. You just have to see Senna.
yeah, it's just a 2-mana 3/2 with quick attack. Like we would
Yeah.
play 2-mana 3/2s just to block fearsome guys. Like you would play the Nexus Strike Piltover guy and Heimerdinger just because he's a 3/2 for 2. Like that's just good.
It's relatively difficult to deal with Lucian on turn 2 when he actually comes down, and then by the time Senna comes down, like you have to deal with both of them at the same time, or you're eating way too much damage.
And like yeah, Avalanche exists, but like the deck could play Radiant Strike and not feel too bad about it. Not Heimer, but like other Lucian decks, right?
Yeah.
One more thing I do want to say, you were saying that you haven't seen that much Piltover. I think actually the best version of the Mistwraith deck, and because like we talked about, Mistwraith hasn't really fallen off too much from its power level.
Yeah.
It is Piltover, and that's because when you do see the control decks getting a lot of life gain, the over-the-top damage from Mystic Shot and Get Excited is very valuable. It's also good for dealing with the other aggressive decks, the Noxus Piltover decks, and that kind of stuff. So like that is something that is playing Mystic Shot. I think is very popular. Something I've seen a lot of streamers playing, and that I've seen on the ladder personally. So that's probably the iteration of Wraithcaller stuff that I think is the most potent right now. So that is one reason why maybe Lucian hasn't seen his heyday yet, but I do think that's like my watch card. Like if Demacia does start to see play again, it's going to be on the back of Lucian more than the Elusive that we've seen before.
I could definitely see that. And I also think I've downplayed how little Piltover I've seen because I forget that all of the Draven decks are Piltover as well. Because like
Boom Crew Rookie's a Piltover card. Like you know how much Piltover you see.
Wait, Boom Crew Rookie's Piltover? I thought he was
Piltover.
Noxus.
No, he's Piltover,
oh my
dude.
God.
Yeah, no, he's...
All right, never mind. I see Piltover everywhere. It's just like I lose to like these like the 3/2 that can't block for 1 mana. Like I get bodied by these early creatures, and then like if I lost to a top deck Mystic Shot, I'd remember it's Piltover, but I'm losing to top deck Decimate now. So like I'm like that's a Noxus card. I died to Noxus.
Like when they just go like 3/2 can't block on 1, Boom Crew on 2. 5/4 can't block on 3. You're like, how do I?
Yeah, my opponent like wouldn't even get that much creature damage, and like I'd wipe their board, and then they'd be like, "Well, here's 2 Mystic Shots from my hand." Next turn, like here's a Get Excited, and I'm like, I can't do anything about this. Play creatures so I can block them.
Yeah, like they do that curve, and then you're like, finally, I'm on turn 4. I can play Avalanche. You look at their board, you're like, oh no.
So anytime they have like 5 cards in hand, I'm like, that's like 10 damage that I can't do anything about.
Yeah, no, it's Piltover Noxus, I think, has definitely been a huge winner.
There's a lot of burn in the game, and it comes down too early for the control decks to really get their like lifesteal guys online, unless it's like specifically Ionia Shadow Isle and they get down like a Dark Water Scourge and hit you with it one time. But and it feels so bad.
Honestly, I wanted to say it one time. It really is Boom Crew Rookie. This is the 1/4 that deals 2 every time it attacks. Like it's just it hard hoses those control decks because they don't play the 4 power minions to like kind of block.
I kind of want to. I'll probably just ask you about this later in like the group chat. I just kind of want to get everybody's opinion on like the best minion in each cost.
In each,
because I'm pretty sure like, because like I'm pretty sure like the best 4 mana unit is like Chump Wump. The best 2 mana unit might be Boom Crew Rookie, but like I have to look at all of them before I can like confidently say that.
Yeah, I'd have to think about it. The only one that I know off the top of my head is for 6 at Tekram and for 3 at Zed. So outside of that,
I was thinking like just units, not champions.
Not even champions. So
well, I mean, like, not champions.
Champions
like
are still units. Like I
just want to know like the top followers.
Right. Have you ever like gotten to a situation where you actually wanted to put more than 6 champions in a deck though? Like maybe Shadow Isles where you want like at least Thresh and Hecarim, but
in Shadow Isle Freljord control, I want like Thresh, Anivia, Hecarim, Tryndamere. I sometimes even think about like throwing in another one.
Maybe you want like Teemo, Jinx, Draven, but for the most part, I've never really felt like the 6 champion limit was like especially limiting, just because there's only 4 champions, and like most of the time they do such different things that like I'm never playing like a 3 of this, a 3 of this, and then I want a 2 of this as well. So
I could see like maybe the Jinx Draven decks wanting like a Katarina or a Teemo, but I don't think control decks really do. Maybe the Ionia ones would.
Maybe, yeah.
I'm trying to think of the Ionia champions other than Karma, but
Yasuo,
probably not.
It's like Yasuo, Zed, and Shen. Like, do you ever want to put Shen or Yasuo in a Zed Karma deck?
I guess the difference is like I would want, if I'm playing Ionia Freljord, I would want Tryndamere, Karma, and Anivia.
Right, that makes sense.
Is like probably it.
All right. Well, that is going to be it for us, everyone. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I am Ryan Effin Miles, and which means that
And
you are
I
not
am
able to figure out his
Boulevard.
last name at all. He's just Boulevard. That's it. It's the
Yep.
full stop. Nothing else. It's on his birth certificate, actually. I guarantee it.
It is. I have it right over there. I'm not going to show you, but trust me.
It's there. We were 1 day late this week, but we will be back on schedule, releasing on Thursday next week. Usually just like after 2 days of playing with like the patches and stuff. No patch next week, but you know where to find us. Follow me on Twitter. Follow him on Twitter, and we will see you next week, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching.